So everybody knew that Hungary's election was important, but what far fewer people perhaps really understood is just how important it was. But also, just as I was recording my original script, just how decisive this result is. Because Viktor Orbán, after 16 years in power, hasn't just lost, he's been seismically defeated, with projections pointing at the time of recording to a clear double-digit lead, potentially large enough for Péter Magyar's Tisza party to secure a two-thirds majority, a standing majority in parliament. And so that changes things far more than just who governs Hungary. It reshapes the European Union's internal balance. It reshapes NATO's potential capacity, Russia's most reliable ally inside the bloc, and alters the trajectory of Western coherence and support for Ukraine. The consequences here will be felt and are being felt already in Brussels, in Washington, in Moscow, and Kiev. So in this video, I wanted to break down what has just happened, why Orbán lost so badly, and what these numbers really tell us, and what this all means going forward for Hungary, for Europe, and of course, global politics, democracies to autocracies, and everything in between. This is The Global Gambit. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. Quick take from me. As I said in the intro, I was recording another video discussing the speculative aspects of this election, but when it became clear just how much Viktor Orbán was being hammered at the polls, I had to rewrite it and re-record it. Because today we are looking at one of the most consequential political defeats in Europe in recent years. Not just because of the result, which we'll come to, but because of what it reveals and what it means. Potential scenarios I will give you at the end of the video, so stay tuned. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about this and how significant is it? Because this isn't really just a loss. It was a collapse. For months, Hungary felt like two different worlds. In one, Orbán and pro-government media projecting confidence. Another victory, another term, more control. On the other hand, Péter Magyar was crisscrossing towns and cities, drawing large crowds, building that grassroots momentum, and steadily peeling, scratching away support from both opposition voters and disillusioned Fidesz supporters, the party of Viktor Orbán. Pollsters, analysts were warning that Orbán's base was draining rapidly. But those two realities never quite met until the day that it counted. Now that they have met, only one of them was real. The reality is that Orbán's era as leader of Hungary is over. After 16 years of near total dominance, he has now conceded, personally calling Magyar to congratulate him, and then appearing before supporters with a visibly shaken Fidesz leadership. And on a point of note, if anything, we should take solace in that. We should take confidence from that, because it demonstrates that despite his desires to centralize power or influence Hungary's political system, democracy is still working in Hungary because he has allowed that transition of power. Whether or not that remains in the coming days and weeks, whether the result will be contested in other ways, we'll come to in a moment. But in principle, it serves as a cautionary bit of optimism. Now, if confirmed, a two-thirds majority would give Tisza the power not just to govern, but to begin rewriting the rules of the system Orbán has spent over a decade building, consolidating, establishing. For a party founded just 2 years ago, that is extraordinary and gives me remnants of sort of when Macron and his En Marche party won in 2017. And it tells you something important immediately. This wasn't just a protest vote, it was a structural rejection. To understand why this matters, you see, you have to understand what Orbán represented. He wasn't just a national leader, he was a model, a pin-up soft version of a strongman, if you like. He was a pioneer of what people called an illiberal democracy. On a spectrum, if you have traditional liberal democracies, Western versions, interpretations, and then totalitarian states like North Korea, this was a hybrid system that maintained elections but hollowed out certain institutions. And that model did travel, influencing movements across Europe, across the world, and aligning with parts of the American conservative ecosystem, which is why Trump and Vance were such big supporters. And the irony being, of course, that the Trump administration talking about the lack of or desire for no foreign interference, and yet going to Hungary to interfere on behalf of Orbán to ensure that he wins. Slight hypocrisy there, but of course, a lot of MAGA supporters will not be capable of noticing that. So his defeat isn't just domestic, symbolic, it's a geopolitical earthquake. Hungary under Orbán wasn't any EU member. It was the one, the spoiler in the eyes of Western observers at least, where it would interfere on sanctions, energy, and of course support for Ukraine. Orbán repeatedly used his veto power to delay or block EU decisions, including the €90 billion financial package for Kiev. He tied concessions to energy demands, including restoring Russian oil flows via pipelines like Druzhba, and resisted phasing out Russian imports. That gave him leverage, and it gave Moscow an incredibly important window, an entry point into influencing the EU internally and undermining its checks and balances. So from Putin's side, from Moscow's perspective, this is a massive strategic setback at a time when he's not exactly doing immediately well on the battlefield either. It removes a reliable partner inside the European system. And from Kiev's perspective, it's the complete opposite. A potential unblocking of funds, a smoother EU coordination, and a more predictable European posture if we remove the differences between Trump and NATO right now. But it doesn't stop there, because Orbán also had strong backing from figures like Donald Trump. The senior US allies publicly endorsing him, others signaling support on the ground. So for Washington, particularly a Trump-aligned foreign policy, this is a huge setback as well. One election, therefore, but three arenas. Russia loses leverage and influence. Ukraine gains support, and a strand of US-aligned European politics loses a key actor. And I'm making another video because given Trump's actions over the Strait of Hormuz, over Iran, but of course NATO, Greenland and alike, he's even pushing more traditional populist supporters of his, the likes of Marine Le Pen, Nigel Farage, to shift more towards a Europe first, which therefore means a pro-Europe or even a pro-EU, something that I'll be breaking down in another video, as I say. So stay tuned for that. Now, of course, the key question is, why did Orbán lose like this? Because it wasn't inevitable. But you start with the economy. There have been years of weak performance, near zero growth, combined with spikes in inflation that at one point were among the highest in the EU and eroding living standards. There were pre-election giveaways, bonuses, benefits, targeted spending. These were significant, but they couldn't fully offset the accumulated frustration amongst the 10 million Hungarians. Add to that the persistent concerns about corruption, cronyism, public procurement favouring political allies, the centralisation of power, the politicalisation of the judiciary, and that base was largely undermining. Then, of course, there's the political shift. For the first time in years, the opposition didn't fragment, it consolidated. This was the most important aspect of any united effort to usurp a more autocratic type or an individual who's held onto power for so long. Magyar was capable of doing what others had struggled, building a coalition that cut across traditional party lines or ideological lines, pulling in opposition voters, independents, and of course, crucially, disillusioned Fidesz insiders. It's almost the reverse of what Trump managed to do in his election, for example. He reframed the election not just as domestic politics, but as a choice about where does Hungary want to be in the world? In the West or East, Brussels, Moscow, somewhere all over the place? And that framing has simplified a complex debate, and it's worked handsomely in his favour. The campaign itself also changed tone. Allegations of foreign interference, claims around Ukraine-linked plots over the explosion of a pipeline, and the broader narrative of external threats became very central. Disinformation concerns, including content designed to mimic credible outlets, have been circulating widely. Leaks suggesting close coordination between Hungarian officials and Russian counterparts added to the sense that geopolitics wasn't just background noise. It was part, if not the campaign environment. And yet, despite all of these attempts, this result is not close, and I don't think we've seen such a landslide in continental European politics for quite a while. especially in a country that has been in such a unique position. But here's the part that matters, therefore, because what comes next? While Orbán has lost power, the system he built hasn't and won't just disappear. Even with a strong majority, dismantling said system takes time. The media ecosystems, these legal frameworks, the institutional appointments, the politicization, like what Trump has been doing by trying to impose and input more politically favorable individuals in the civil service. So this isn't a clean break for Hungary. It's a contested transition, but the fact that Orbán has conceded is a good start. Simultaneously, expectations are immediate and intense. Brussels will want and expect a restored cooperation and movement on unlocking nearly 20 billion in frozen funds. Kiev will hope and expect the removal of blockages on financing and a more consistent EU line. NATO will expect alignment on security and strategy, albeit it's difficult to imagine how that works with the United States and Trump's at the moment. But within Hungary, of course, voters will expect tangible economic and political change. And there is also a practical constraint here. Even with a large majority, governing against an entrenched network is difficult. And the 2/3 threshold is seemingly confirmed. So the opportunity is larger: constitutional changes, institutional resets. And so you could see a real return for a much more resilient democracy in Hungary, less of the democratic backsliding. There's the EU angle, where Hungary's veto has been a reoccurring friction point and leveraged often by Putin in the eyes of many. But on budgets and negotiations and foreign policy, removing that friction will completely change overnight how quickly the EU is able to act and respond, especially in times of economic crisis, tariffs, security concerns, or perhaps responding to the situation over Iran. If the obstruction disappears, performance has to improve. Energy is another layer as well. Hungary's reliance on Russian oil and gas has shaped its politics. So any shift away from that model has economic and strategic costs, which the new government will have to play delicately. How quickly a new government can diversify, but at what price, will matter for both domestic stability and EU cohesion, because if Orbán is able to play that against his opponents, then he may well be able to return to power. The bigger question is, of course, this election is a test of whether a political system that drifted away from the more traditional Western ideas of liberal democratic norms is reversible through the ballot box. It's a good case test and a good demonstration of democracy in practice. Reversals are harder than victories. Building a system is one thing, but unwinding it is another. And therefore, of course, we come to what could happen next. Well, there are three paths to me that stand out. One is a rapid alignment. Hungary quickly pivots back towards EU consensus. It unblocks the funding and it normalizes relations whilst distancing itself from Moscow or other more autocratic or strongman kind of things. Two is a constrained change. Reforms begin but are slowed by the institutional resistance and political pushbacks, the systems, the remnants of Orbán, which don't want to see it all unminded. Three, more friction. Expectations outpace delivery and tensions re-emerge, just in a different form, and therefore bogging down the EU more than you might hope. Which path Hungary takes will determine whether this becomes a model for political reversal or a warning about just how difficult it is. So when people say that this was just another European election, well, I don't think many people are, those people are missing the point. This is a massive moment, potentially, for the consistency, the rapidity, the coherency of Europe through that the EU or NATO, or on an individual basis for just Hungary itself, and therefore the balance of power, which bigger powers have an influence over Europe, and whether or not its own ability to have strategic autonomy is possible, and it can move as a single unified bloc, even if it isn't a federal state. But we've got to see what comes next, and of course what it means for Ukraine, Russia, the United States, most of all us living in Europe. But let me know in the comments below what you guys think. I'll be joined by more guests, I should say, in the coming couple of days to break this down for us further, what it means for all the elements that I've discussed. And do consider subscribing if you want to be a part of that. Give the video a like, it's free. And check out this video here to understand the continued geopolitical things at play around Europe and the rest of the world. Take care.